The first of the 5 steps of crisis management, when we have a little bit of lead time, is to be able to assess the situation. Now remember Murphy's Law, the person who's most likely on the front line is probably a person who's only been with you for a short period of time, and they're going to have to follow some set steps and procedures that you identify for them. And that's what our little template of the 1 to 5 is all about. So they're going to need to use that table that you've identified that says, what's the event? How big an impact could this have on me, and who do I need to contact? We recommend that in all situations, regardless of the severity, that you identify one key contact who essentially plays that crisis management role and one alternative, regardless of whether it's a minor incident like a trip or a fall, right the way up to we've heard there is going to be a tsunami, cyclone or major fire. That one person then plays the top of the contact tree, and they decide how far down your contact tree reaches, whether they involve everybody or just some people. But your staff, remembering that volunteer who's standing on the front line, needs to be able to see the phone number, call the number. If they don't get an answer, call the alternative number and know that they've done just what you want from your business. So we're going to work through that little template right now. So your contact hierarchy may look like an organisational chart. It may look like a bit of a spider web, but ideally it has some sort of hierarchy about it. What that does is we know who to start with, who they're contacting, and then how that information gets down to the people who need it, and how it finds its way back up to the top. So on that page of your contact hierarchy, it's best to do this with a pen, I find, rather than trying to do it on the computer first of all. Take the time to start drawing out your contact hierarchy. But first, the decision to be made is, in your crisis event, when you have some level of warning or you've heard that it is happening, who's the first person that needs to be contacted? Who is the first cab off the rank? We call them the Ghostbuster. You know that old 80s movie, Who You Gonna Call? That's the question I want you to answer now. Who does your staff, frontline or management, call once they have been advised that there is a crisis event or potential crisis affecting your business? Who is the top of your tree? So ideally, you would have one main and one alternative person for most crisis situations, whether it be an incident or a major disaster. In your situation where you've got the two most important people, you need to have that decision now as to who the alternative is going to be. If both of those people are out, who is it? Who is going to play that key role? And I told that little story before about the surfers on the Gold Coast. The decision they had to come to was, we've got a mate who runs a similar business in Sydney, actually in Melbourne, out on the Great Ocean Road. We'll call him and ask if he would step into our business if, in the unlikely event that both of us were affected, one of us had to go to hospital and the other one was going with it. Who is our third party? Our business is in a similar situation. While we might have 20 staff, there is a very small number of senior managers, and we've had to identify a third party outside of our business who could step in the situation that the executive team were unavailable. Whether it's unavailable or not able to respond for one reason or another. So this is exactly the time that you need to identify that person, most likely, and who's the alternative. I'll tell a little story which is a little bit heartbreaking, but it's one that I heard from work we've just done in the Northern Territory. A family who run a little caravan park and accommodation property in a cattle station south of Tennant Creek had a situation where there was an arsenic scare. So the health department, rightly so, shut the property down at 1 o'clock in the morning and did a full evacuation. The two owners of that property were not in town at the time. Why? Because they were in Perth dealing with a son who was only days away from dying from leukaemia. The unfortunate event that occurred was that the media made an unfortunate connection between those two events and ran a story linking arsenic in the water to their son's situation in Perth. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. That couple lost their son 3 days later, and they simply said, we're not interested in what's happening over there in the Northern Territory. We're in Perth with our family and with our son, and we're dealing with the grief of this situation. A few days later, they started to re-enter the world and started to ask the questions, where's our business at? What are we going to return to? They had delegated authority to a person who was living on site He did the best job he could do in that situation, but he just wasn't armed with the right information or the right skills or the right authority to deal with that situation. So what it meant was the time it took to recover was enormous, and the amount of money they've needed to spend is almost beyond their capability. Now, that's a very emotional story, but it's a very real story. They needed to be able to identify somebody outside of their business to step in. He did the best job he could do, but on reflection, they would have done it differently. They would have made sure that whoever was going to step in knew just what was expected of them, and that's what I want you to do today. Know just what's expected of them. We talk about media in a lot of ways like we guard ourselves from them. We're trying desperately to make sure that a bad news story doesn't get out. What I want to train you about today is how to make use of that situation and get your best foot forward, because it might be the only opportunity you get to tell your story in your terms. So we want to make the most of that media opportunity, not to try and close down that media avenue. And to do that, you need somebody who's well trained and skilled and has the right messages in advance. So hopefully you've identified that ghost bust, and what I want you to do now is have a look at our little template. So for those of you that have got the hard copy, that's the first 2 pages, page 3 and page 4. You'll see that there's a space there under step 3, communicate, to identify the name and phone number and the alternative name and phone number for the person you've identified as the most likely to manage a crisis situation. The person you want, that frontline employee or that volunteer, to pick up the phone and call in a crisis situation. So if you don't already have something like this in your business that explains to your staff what you need them to do in a crisis, this is the template that you could use. If you have your own, then continue to use your own. But I'd like you all now to identify, put the name of the person and their phone number into that space, either in the hard copy or in your electronic version, to make sure that we've got them. Once you've done that, we'll take a little look at the checklist that's on the back. So once you've got those numbers in there, flip over the page and have a look at the crisis checklist. Now, we've put in some pre-filled information, things that mean something to us. This is your template. You can put in there anything that you like. So it is there for your use. Remember that you're asking your staff member to take this straight off the wall, call the phone number on the front, and then follow the steps in here. So follow this checklist and make sure that they've done it. So if there are specific things that need to be done for your business, make sure that they understand what they are as part of the induction that you do for every staff member coming to your organisation, and that those things are relevant to you. So what your staff member will do, will take this off the wall, they'll assess the situation, they'll make a call. They'll need to make some sort of call. Do I need to provide some emergency response, first aid, marking off the area around it? Do I need to make the call immediately? And do I need to evacuate immediately? And do I know the evacuation procedure and the locations? Only once you know that everyone is safe and we're not putting anyone else's life at risk do we pick up the phone and start making any phone calls. So we assess the situation, we undertake immediate emergency response, and then we start the communication tree. Realising that it could be a life-threatening situation that your customer or staff member is facing. They're going to be under an enormous amount of stress, and they need to be able to just know that they're following a process and they're doing exactly what you'd expect of them. That's what this little checklist is for. Once they've made that communication, they've calmed the situation, they're in control of the environment, we hope that they would take a moment to flick over the page and just make sure that they have done the things that are on here, whether they physically check it off or mentally check it off. Work through that crisis checklist to know that they've done what you expect from them in a crisis situation. So work through that process now. Cross out anything that's not relevant. For those of you using your computers, simply change the words, make sure they're relevant to you, and know that a frontline staff member would be doing what you expect if they work through that immediate checklist. Now, they're not covering off everything. Lots of other people are going to be involved in your crisis response, but if it is something that needs to be decided right there and on the spot, that you provide them with as much guidance as you can give them so that they have the headspace to make the right decision. So what I'll ask you to do from here, if you haven't already finished, take it back with your business, have a little bit more of a think about it, but do, please, if you haven't already got a form like this within your first aid kit or accessible to your frontline staff or somebody who represents your business out on the front line, do make sure that you do it. Print it, laminate it, get it out there, Continue to work through it with your crisis team over time, but take action today, because it's just as likely old Murphy's Law would say that this event will happen tomorrow, and you'll say, if only I'd done what Mark had said, and just put it out there, even though it wasn't 100% perfect. We agreed on it, we're comfortable with it, and we put it in the market. Make sure that your staff are aware of it. Don't just put it out there and hope that they notice it. Let them know that it's there. You want them to use it, and that's the process that you go through.